this has been the big problem for the protesters, is that they're kind of leaderless. None of these groups can command all the protesters. The leaders of these groups don't have that control. It would actually be to their advantage, frankly, if they could just declare that we're going to withdraw this week and we will reconvene in another protest a week later or something. And then give the government a chance to try to do something. I think the monkey is on the government's back in a way. The government is sort of the one party that is intermediary between both Beijing and the protesters. And this government has such a horrible track record of representing Hong Kong. It's always seen by people on the street to represent Beijing's views and to lecture Hong Kong on Beijing's views. And what the government needs to do now is to be seen to stand up for Hong Kong and to try to explain, which it has failed to do so far, why Hong Kong people are concerned about these things. But we're not seeing that so far, and I think protesters will be looking for signs that the government plans to be proactive in trying to move forward with Beijing. Beijing has a kind of irrational scare of political development in Hong Kong. Their one country, two systems model almost demands it if they're going to maintain the rule of law and other things in Hong Kong. A heavy hand by Beijing is certainly not called for.
Professor, now we have pro-establishment officials. We've got, of course, pro-democracy officials, all calling for some of these protesters to retreat. The chief executive gave his ultimatum that we need to remove the barricades so that people could get to work. They opened a 2-meter walkway so that people could get into the central government offices. Who needs to make the next move?
I really see the government needing to make the next move. I think protesters are sort of feeling like they've got nothing for their efforts. And you know, a business community also pays attention to what's going on here in Hong Kong. And frankly, I think they should be watching the government and watching the sort of evolution of Hong Kong's legal system, its political system. These things are important. The rule of law that Hong Kong has depends on a high degree of autonomy for Hong Kong. So it's not the protesters in a way they should be worried about. It's really the Hong Kong government and its relationship with Beijing. And I would be looking for this government to step up and show a sign that maybe it's going to do something. It's going to advance some kind of argument to Beijing that maybe Beijing hasn't been prepared to accept to date.
And Michael, one thing the government should very much be interested in is the stability of the financial center in Hong Kong. If it doesn't move from its current stance, is there a substantial threat to the stability?
I think that there's not much threat when it comes from protest. I think they are largely quiet, but I'm sorry, my mic is very loud in my ear. They're largely quiet, the protesters. But I think it's a rule of law thing. And when Beijing when it wrote its white paper, it sort of put out an ultimatum that all authority comes from Beijing and that Beijing can interpret or amend the basic law any way it wants. And that's really contrary to the rule of law. I've been having debates with people from Beijing over the weekend where they accused the protesters of, quote unquote, breaking the rule of law. You break the law. You don't break the rule of law. You undermine the rule of law. And typically that's something that a government does. And so it's clear that Beijing doesn't really, or at least these officials in Beijing don't seem to clearly understand what makes Hong Kong tick. And if I were watching the market, I would be watching to see if this education process is sinking in or not.